Have you ever wondered if it's possible to live in sync with your cycle? Do you struggle with a negative mindset around your period? Are you wondering if it's possible to be feminist and anti-birth control? We're going to explore these questions and so much more in the Managing Your Fertility podcast, because this is about helping you live a whole and full life. I'm your host and guide, Bridget Busacker, joining you in this journey of exploration related to women's healthcare, feminism, and fertility awareness. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hi, Leah. Welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you in season 3.
Thanks, Bridget. I've been wanting to be on your show for the last 2 seasons, so I'm glad it finally happened.
I know our schedules have finally aligned. So before we jump into our conversation today around the women's health movement, feminism, Leah Jacobson founded the Guiding Star Project in 2011 after feeling called to help women and families by providing resources that honor natural law and promote holistic feminism. She seeks to create Guiding Star centers to serve as beacons of hope, joy, and truth, safe havens that uphold human dignity in all stages of life. Leah lives in Minnesota with her family. We actually live a few hours apart, which is pretty fun, and works as a board-certified lactation consultant. As a mother to 7 children, she has a special interest in supporting young women as they transition to their roles as new mothers, and she also released her book, Wholistic Feminism. This is amazing, Leah. And I love this because you're living out babies and dreams. You have all these kids, which is such a gift, and you're also pursuing these dreams that God has placed on your heart to help support other women to be able to say yes to life and yes to these bigger dreams, or the same dreams or smaller dreams, that God places on our heart, which is great.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think women are, we're complex beings, and very few of us are called to only do one thing in our lives. So I think many of us have multiple things that'll be happening parallel to one another. And it's just been really a beautiful gift that my husband and I, that we've been able to kind of grow our careers and ministry work and our family. It's all just kind of been growing together.
So tell us a bit more about your story and how you came to be a leader truly in the space of women's health and the space of holistic feminism and new feminism.
Sure. I think I've always had a sense that I was called to lead in some way, even just from my childhood and into high school and into college. Um, I've always naturally gravitated towards, galvanizing, kind of pulling people together, creating groups, kind of creating like little mini movements. And so I think I really began to understand maybe the call in my life after campus ministry. So I had worked at the University of Minnesota Duluth, running the Newman Center. My husband Josh and I lived on campus in the Newman Center for the first 3 years of our marriage. And at that point in time, I was leading students along in their faith journey to, grow in their faith and understand and love the church. But I was just seeing this kind of problem walking right alongside the as a barrier to faith was really an understanding of human identity and human flourishing and the role of the body. And it became really clear to me as I transitioned into a new mother, as I became a mom on a campus, and the lies that all of a sudden, as soon as I had a baby and I'm on a college campus, the lies were just coming like darts at me from all angles, from professors, administrators, students, just so many opinions about motherhood, and how that basically would disqualify me from doing anything other than just, being barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen. And I saw that this really was the biggest battle when you're trying to build a culture of life, is an acceptance of just what it means to be a mother. And so my goal, I think, kind of at that point in time, or my path, my career, my call to lead in a new sphere was really clarified and solidified as I just started welcoming babies and started really appreciating and embracing my female body in a real public way. When you are the campus minister and you're surrounded by 11,000 college students living around you every single day, the choices you make are on display and they're open for interpretation and questions. And we had to very quickly make up our mind about what we really believed and how we really felt we were being called to live. And so that's, I think, how it happened that I ended up in this role that I'm in. It's just one of those things that you realize I'm being called to speak and I've been given a platform, and if I don't use it, it would be a shame.
Yeah, I love that. I bet you got so many questions from college women, just so, out of a genuine curiosity of how does this work? What does this look like? Coming from a space where oftentimes you're told you pick your career and
Yep.
classes, undergrad and graduate, it's so much the message is that you choose this first. And if you choose your children, well, obviously you're giving up all of the potential that you have.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's absolutely the message. Um, yes, college age women had a lot of questions for me. But I think I almost got more questions. I also joined a local moms group at, one of the churches. I joined a Bible study. I think I almost got more pushback from the mothers,
Hmm.
that felt like somehow the fact that I was still working. And then crazy me, I went back to school to do a master's degree in health and wellness. And I was, just doing things. And there was a lot of, just kind of concern of, you're going to miss your children's childhood. You're going to regret this. A lot of, I felt like a lot of judgment, a lot of, instead of how can I help you or why do you feel called to this? It was much more of a snap judgment up front of that's not how a mom should act. Like, that's not what a mother should be doing. The college students were a little bit more like, okay, like you do you. I wouldn't do it. I don't want kids. Like they were much more sort of like, okay, if you want to do it, do it. Um, but I felt like from the church sometimes and from other women, there was a judgment. And that
Hmm.
was hard to kind of sort through because you sometimes are talking to more seasoned mothers and you really don't want to miss their advice. You really want to be respectful and say, is there a wisdom? Is there a learned experience that I need to hear here? But I think what had happened for so long in the church is that really the role and the identity of woman was kind of, narrowed down and stereotyped to one particular way of living out your femininity.
Hmm.
And that's never been the teachings of the church. That's never been the position of the church. So I had to kind of come to terms with that and recognize that not everyone is going to understand when you're called to lead or when you're called to live a very public life. And you got to find your supporters, your tribe, your friends, and hold them very dearly close to you.
Yeah. It really makes me think about the saints and how often they did something so radical that we see now and we think, wow, that's so amazing. That's so awesome. Good for them. But thinking, a little more contextually to what they were choosing in a time and in the context of their friends and their family, which was often seen as very radical, very in some
Oh,
ways bizarre and something that you would never do, that you're stepping out of the box that you're supposed to live in. I think we've never seen that um go away. There's never been a point in time where
yeah,
we didn't have boxes that we like to put people in to fit the time and the cultural
yeah,
narratives. And so to be able to say, no, I'm going to do this differently, I'm actually going to do what God calls me to, that
yeah.
is such a radical way to live and requires so much curiosity and an openness to say, okay, well, what is God asking of me? And I think so much of that judgment comes in from a lack of curiosity and willing to learn from someone else, because it's kind of scary to think, well, what if I do have a different calling and I've been saying no? Or what if this is my calling to be home with my kids and that does fulfill me and that's enough? And it's okay to say that that's enough too. And that you don't
Yeah,
have
and
to have a
yeah.
side hustle or something like that.
Well, and in all fairness, I think that the reaction that I was hearing from, very faithful Catholic women, it was a reaction, to a wave of feminism and to a movement that also narrowly defined women, but it defined them in the exact opposite way. It
Yeah.
defined them as their career and outside the home and children having nothing to do with their identity. And so I think it was a very natural response seeing, oh, it looks like you might be going that way. And we're nervous for you. We're scared for you because we don't think you'll find fulfillment there, which I can respect and where that fear would come from. But in response, it almost swung, the pendulum swung so far almost to the other way. You can't have those things as part of your identity and as part of your life and still be a faithful woman, which we know is just simply not the case. You just have to be whoever God called you to be in whatever context, whatever situation he wants you to live out your faith. So
Yeah, you touched on the certain waves of feminism, and I'd love to go through those before we jump into what you and I have chatted, off the cameras, off the podcast around fourth wave feminism. Your book touches on this. Can you give us an overview of all the waves of feminism? Just quick highlight, which
yeah,
I will say, all of this has gone into much more detail in your book, and I highly recommend listeners check that out and read it.
yeah. So I basically just did a quick in my book. The first couple chapters talk about the history of the women's movement in the United States.
Mhm.
Feminism is this worldwide movement and ways country at different times. But in the United States, the movement is traditionally thought to have roughly three waves, starting the fourth wave right about now. And we recognize the first wave of feminism about 200 years ago, it got its start. Main issues would have been the right for women to vote, the suffrage movement, also abolitionism, they were trying to, the issue of slavery was of concern, and then also prohibitionism. The first feminists were pretty opposed to alcohol. So the every wave has its issues that matter at that time, that now you can't imagine the women's movement even caring about alcohol, but at the time that was a very big important point. And that wave went roughly up until about 1920, when we see the 19th Amendment ratified in the Constitution, which gives women the right to vote. So that wave lasted, it was a longer wave. It took a long kind of build up, and it took a long time. It was a long wave. It was close to, 80 years maybe. And then we see a little bit of a pause. And then the second wave of the feminist movement really gets started right after World War II. As the men are coming home from war, there's a tension because women have been in the factories and they've been living a different role than they've had for a while. And there's a little bit of a tension there. And then a groundbreaking book comes out, The Feminine Mystique, which really challenges where women should live out their lives. Betty Friedan's book was monumental in launching the second wave of the feminist movement. Completely different issues came forward in the second wave. Suffrage obviously is no longer a point. Abolitionism, prohibitionism, those are done. The main issue now is going to be reproductive rights. And it began with women just wanting the right to a career and the right to be outside the home, but it very quickly was kind of overcome by the sexual revolution and became a reproductive rights movement. And so the main issues became abortion and contraception and no-fault divorce. That wave went through until about the 1980s. And then we see the third wave of the feminist movement come. And this is where feminism and women's history really gets institutionalized in the academic world and in the college setting. This is when women's studies programs are established at major universities. We begin to see feminism become more intellectual and ideological. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, it had been, sashes and rallies and marches. And that kind of goes away in the third wave. But it's almost more insidious because now it's policy and law, and it's a very high thinking, high level, very influential movement. Now at this point, we see Hillary Clinton and very influential women sign on to the third wave of the feminist movement. And the issue really shifts into gender. It really shifts off of reproductive rights into just human equality and gender rights. So this movement this wave is just kind of coming to an end right now. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing the rise of the fourth wave of the feminist movement. And this is where I say there's tremendous opportunity. Yeah. But this is also a moment where it could go down a very different path. And we're seeing what is already being described as intersectional feminism, which is a type of feminism that, really tries to pull together all the varying identities of a person, all of our sort of, I guess the best way to say it is, almost the ways that you've been victimized in your life, the ways that you maybe are a minority or that your voice might not be heard. And it's trying to bring these voices forward in a way that gives more attention to the way, to problems and things that should be fixed, which on the surface is a beautiful idea. But as it's playing out in the movement forming, it's kind of becoming a bit chaotic. And so I think we're seeing the fourth wave of the feminist movement falter a little bit as it's getting started, because it no longer necessarily has women at the center of the movement. It's no longer the women's movement so much as it is kind of a vague equality movement. And how do you create human equality across all classes of people it's a hard question to solve if you're trying to call it the women's movement. So that's the moment we're at right now. That's a brief, but not so brief.
Yeah. As you were saying this, in each wave, it was like I could pull out parts that are good and then see how quickly it became distorted. Just the idea of saying that women have a right to vote and a right to their children and a right to have their own voice within a marriage, that their husband doesn't own them, right to property. Like, those are really good things. with second wave, thinking like women can work outside the home and that's okay to be in this, that's a good thing. But then to say like, okay, now we're going to introduce the idea that love can be, expressed in a variety of ways. You don't need to be married. You don't need to have these foundations in place. Okay, that gets kind of messy. And with third wave, it's like the idea of policy. I'm thinking, okay, so are we finally going to talk about workplace policy and the fact that women don't need to be in closets like pumping if they're breastfeeding? I mean, that sounds like it could be a good thing to have those spaces and that you don't have to do it on your 15-minute break.
Yeah.
But how quickly it becomes distorted by trying to fix and almost play God in a sense, or try to create it so it's so perfect that we forget that that's like not a possibility as humans to make something perfect.
And I think that is a very, like, you're very astute right there. The overarching kind of theme of the women's movement, unfortunately, the negative aspect of it where it keeps going wrong is this idea of control, and that we can control the outcomes, that we somehow do play God, and that we are responsible for making the world exactly how it should be, instead of a sort of acceptance of the world as it is and an
Mm-hmm.
acceptance of reality as it's given to us. We try to manufacture and create the reality that we desire, which ultimately, I mean, you rail against Mother Nature. But as Camille Paglia very famously said, Mother Nature is not a feminist. Mother Nature is just Mother Nature. So I'm always just kind of in awe of that astute observation that she made. As she's a lesbian feminist and very smart woman. And she just said, Mother Nature is not a feminist. We can rail against it all we want, but it
Yeah.
will always reset to a natural order.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you had mentioned in your book that, especially in second wave feminism, some of the prominent leaders, like Betty Friedan was one of them, and I believe you said Gloria Steinem as well. They were women that really pushed hard that women should want to work outside the home, but completely forgot working class women. They forgot about the women who are having children and working. These were women who were white, they were wealthy, they were living in nice bougie homes with help for if they had children or not. I know Gloria, I don't know that she did, but I was really struck by that commentary because I thought, wow, yeah, it does feel like there's a gap missing for like the average woman, not necessarily in the 1% that has so much more affluence and availability to her to make so many varied decisions in her life.
Yeah, and I remember really kind of having that realization when talking with my grandma about like feminism. Like, my one grandma had 8 children and my other grandma had 11 children. And they both ran farms. They lived on dairy farms with all their kids. And, they were the ones that were giving birth throughout these crazy years of twilight birth and like all these crazy policies against women's bodies. And just talking with them about the women's movement and feminism and how they just had zero, like, they just did not in any way identify with it. Like, it
Mm.
had no impact on their life. Like, they just were like, oh yeah, well, that was a thing some women did in the city, but like, no one out here did that. They were out in rural Midwestern America. And they really honestly thought the movement had zero impact, that it did nothing for women,
Mm.
that it didn't really have any results. And so it was just a fascinating kind of conversation. When you asked them about like who, the feminist leaders, they're like, who? Like, I don't know who that is. Like, I don't care. And it was just the recognition of they were too poor. They were too busy. They were working. They were raising their families.
Yeah.
They were too low class in a sense to even have their voices heard. They
Mm.
were not part of the women's movement because they were not privileged enough to have the time to take part in the movement. So none of those voices were heard.
That's so wild to think about. And I wonder how much of that is still true today, because it seems like a lot of leaders or more prominent feminist figures tend to want to speak on behalf of groups of people. And that has really started to get more bothersome to me because I'm like, why don't we just hand the mic over? Like, why don't you just like share it instead of white knuckling it? Like, let the person you're talking about or this group that you're making an assumption about really
Yeah.
let them speak.
Amen. I absolutely agree with you. Yeah, I actually just had that experience 2 weeks ago. We had a rally down in El Paso. Well, Las Cruces, New Mexico is where we ended up having the rally, but it was the opening of a new center that we're Guiding Stars opening, a women's health center. Happens to be next door to a very famous abortionist. And the protesters and the people that came and the screaming and just the harassing of the people as they were speaking. Interestingly, the first 3 speakers of the rally were men, and the
Hmm.
men were heckled somewhat. There was some heckling, But as soon as the microphone was handed to a young woman, it was a college age woman that took the microphone, and the protesters, which the majority were men, interestingly enough,
Hmm.
started screaming over her voice, just screaming, just yelling vile things, about, I hope you're raped. I hope, like, all these terrible,
Oh my
terrible things
gosh.
about, yeah, like, you're a betrayal to all women. You're just a joke of a woman. And these are coming from men for the most part.
Yeah.
I couldn't help but notice. So there were two women that spoke before me. And then by the time I got the microphone, I was angry because it was so clear that it was women's voices, pro-life women's voices that were trying to be silenced.
Hmm.
And the women who can speak most clearly to the experience of having a female body, of supporting other women, of working with women, those are the voices that they were trying to drown out. And I think that that happens more frequently than we would like to, admit. We
Hmm.
silence those we need to listen to.
Yeah. I'd like you to touch on a guiding star center because I think it's helpful for someone listening, thinking like, okay, you're coming in near an abortion clinic. Like, what are the services that you're offering? Or perhaps they're thinking, what are you taking away from women if you're taking away abortion? What does a center offer?
Yeah, so this is that instance is a very unique one for us. Actually, we've never gone next to an abortion clinic, and it actually took quite a bit of convincing because I'm really not into that sort of like confrontational. Because what Guiding Star does, it invites women into our space in a very hospitable, invitational. We want you to truly understand and embrace and love your natural body. Like, we help women love their body by understanding it. So our core services always start with a focus on fertility awareness, because as women, we're fertile human beings, and that should never be, suppressed. That's just, yeah, we start with the very basics of your body is not the problem, your fertility is not the problem. So let's learn it and let's cooperate with it. So that's our first core service. Our second core service is childbirth and prenatal support and care. So classes, we have midwives, doulas, work with women to really help them understand the birthing process, not to fear it, because there's so much fear and
Mhm.
trauma wrapped up in
Yeah.
childbirth, and to remove that. And then the third core service is lactation, breastfeeding support, postpartum care. So all of our centers have to provide support to breastfeeding women, just again, to understand that your body can do this with the proper support, because so many women just doubt, they do not think that they're capable. They think it's going to be too hard, something's wrong with my body, it won't work, I won't make enough milk, which is very rarely the case. But there's just this negative self-fulfilling sort of prophecy that I'm going to fail because I'm a
Mhm.
lemon and I don't work. So that definitely comes out in the breastfeeding postpartum period, severe depression and issues that start to arise. And then the fourth core service that all of our centers offer is just a drop-in child watch, an area for children to be welcomed. That is a vital piece of all of this, because women, in the breastfeeding world, I work as a lactation consultant, we recognize a mother and a baby as a dyad. And so the health of the mother and the child is dependent upon one another. And we view them as a dyad. They should be together. So if the child does not feel welcome in our space, we're failing, because the
Mhm.
mother cannot be fully herself without her children. They're part of us. They are literally part of us. So that's what Guiding Star Centers do. It's a very proactive and sort of preventative approach to issues surrounding crisis pregnancy and abortion. Like, really, those are not the points in time where we want to meet women. We want to have a relationship with women years and years and years before she ever is facing a difficult pregnancy decision. She should know us already and already be a patient and be getting her well woman care from us ideally. So
I think that's
yeah.
so amazing. I remember you introducing it when we first met, and this was probably like 8 years ago. And I was just in awe of the idea that a woman could go to a center and receive all the care that she needs, that you're not necessarily having to like book all these different appointments at all these different locations and trying to figure out, okay, well, if you don't have a car or you're working with a bus schedule and you have your kids' schedules and you're like, I can't make this happen. So really making this available for every woman in the position that she's in so that this can work for her and with her, which I think is just so powerful and was so inspiring to me and eye-opening to me, because that doesn't really exist in the medical care, and then especially in the narratives around abortion too, and the support for women. You're waiting until that point where they're in a pregnancy that they are scared about, that they don't know if they can or if they should, and they don't have support in the other areas as well, if they need mental health support or physical support or potentially trauma support. And I think it's just so amazing that the center is set up to be able to provide those services and meeting them hopefully before they're at that point of saying, I don't know what to do and I don't feel like I have a choice.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we really aim to have girls into our center the first time at 9 years old. We're hoping our first point of interaction is that at 9 years old, they're coming in and they're just, experiencing the cycle show and just learning and hearing for the very first time, like, your body is amazing and this is what it's doing. And there's
Mm.
nothing to be afraid of. You should not be ashamed of your female body. Don't be embarrassed when you get your period. It means everything's going right. Um, and that's groundbreaking. That is culture changing narrative that generations of women have never heard. There's so much shame and stigma still attached to a female body. We're going to
Mhm.
break it down one little girl at a time. This next generation, we just hope and pray doesn't carry that same wound.
Yeah, I remember being in a grad class and I focused my master's in some of the women's health coursework. And my background's public health and strategic communication, and I was really fascinated because we had conversations around fertility awareness in one of the classes. A few students had brought it up, so I thought, "Ooh, okay, there's some ladies here who know what's happening." They were either focusing in maternal and child health, they were pre med, or they might have been doing something epidemiology, something like that. And a few of the women were so surprised to hear about fertility awareness. They didn't even meet it with judgment. They met it with total curiosity. And they said, I seem to remember my mom bringing something up about this, but I don't remember. Or some were like, wait, there are apps for this? Like, what's it called? I'm really curious. I want to see how it works. I'd love to like see what this is. And I remember feeling so shocked because I really thought, okay, this is going to be met with total judgment. We're not going to spend the time of day on this. And even the instructor herself was like, oh, this is so interesting. She normally didn't teach the class. So I think that also put her in a space of curiosity too,
Yeah.
and really encourage these students, like, say a little bit more, like, tell us more, what have you learned about it? And I found that um so empowering, really, to see this as an opportunity for growth and for change as we move forward in feminism, as you talked about too with this fourth wave, the opportunity we have, because it really seemed to be the previous generation of these women, their parents, their moms, or before that, where there was a disconnect or complete
Yeah.
frustration or disbelief in fertility awareness. And it seems that that lack of conversation has actually is helping in some ways to lay
I
the
think
groundwork for
so.
women.
I no, I think you're absolutely right because I think, there's a lot of buzzwords and rhetoric that goes with the women's movement and feminism and, phrases like bodily autonomy are thrown out there. But what does that mean? And any
Mhm.
woman that really like takes that and sits with it and is like, okay, bodily autonomy, that's a right to live in my body. That's a right to have,
Yeah.
full awareness and to work in concert with my system. And yet I'm being told to suppress the whole thing and change it. And what does that mean? What are my rights as a woman if I'm expected to completely shut it down and I'm never taught how to work with it? And so I think there is an awakening that's happening among just genuine seekers of truth. And it's not
Mhm.
based in any sort of religious or moral obligation. It's based just in a who am I as a human being and how am I going to live my life and interact with the world? And those are very real questions that everybody should face at some point. And fertility awareness is that real first step to understanding yourself and to knowing who you uniquely are. You have to know the body you live in if you want to know the human you are.
Oh yeah, that's so important. I love the way you just that's a great catchphrase right there. I think for people to think about because it's so much there's so much to be said there in understanding who we are. And if we are turning off our bodies as women and we're trying to fit into a man's world or be little men, I know Dr. Stacey Sims talks a lot about like we are not little men. We are
Yeah.
women. And there is a difference in being a woman and it is a good difference and it's so much more empowering and helpful to ourselves to actually understand how our bodies work and the ways in which we can lean into who we are to show up in the world and not find ourselves, I think, in a I know you've often said this in your book, in a commonly male normative world where we're just trying to
Yeah.
fit in and be like one of the guys. It's like, I don't want, when I read that, I was like, I don't want to be one of the guys. I want to be me. I want to be able to dress in a feminine way. I want to be able, and you don't have to be a woman, but I do. I want to, and I shouldn't be seen as someone who's shouldn't be taken seriously if I wear a dress or something that I couldn't be a CEO because of how I look or what I do. And I think there again, those stereotypes and those boxes come into play where it's like, well, to be a woman, you have to look this way. It's like, it's so far beyond looking a certain way. And at the same time, if you want to look and wear lipstick or look in a certain way that we've stereotyped, that's fine. But know that it goes beyond that. That is so
Yeah.
so surface level.
Well, and that's really where the fourth wave of the feminist movement, the women's movement, is at right now. This is the decision that it's making right now because, it's going down one pathway where, identity politics and gender is, the key issue. And from my perception, looking at it, it's a very surface level sort of self-definitive reality. And it's those boxes, like you just said, it's opening the boxes for anybody to sit anywhere. But what does it ultimately actually mean? What does it mean, to human happiness and human identity and flourishing as a human race, as a
Yeah.
species? And then the other path is based upon a much deeper, truth that actually can connect humanity. And so I see it, if it goes down the pathway of, intersectional feminism and gender ideology and politics, um, we're never going to be able to connect and understand each other because everyone is defining their own reality and identity. And it's very difficult to have a conversation with somebody that you don't know the terms, you don't know, there's no commonality, there's no common ground of our experience in this world as human beings. Now, versus another pathway that's based deeply in a biological reality and a truth of the bodies that we're given. It's very deeply rooted just in our DNA, in our, this very scientific, very biological basis that, we may look completely different. I may have short hair, you may have long hair, we may have nothing in common, politically, religiously, or anything, but we share, same chromosomal makeup, which indicates that our bodies are going to behave in the same fashion. And
Mhm.
so I can have a moment of connection and understanding for you because our bodies do the same thing.
Mm.
We function the same way. We're going to experience the world in a similar way because our hormones fluctuate similarly. Like I understand you now, in a way that's beyond definitions. That's not just surface level what box I choose to sit in. It's my body and your body do something similar, and right there is a moment of connection.
Do you think with fourth wave feminism that there's going to be a conversation around ditching the label or redefining? Because something that um, I've seen argued, and I don't necessarily disagree with it, I grapple with it a lot, is, men don't have a movement that, like feminism has its own movement. And I can understand, some of the core reasons why. But at
Mhm.
this point in time, do you think that this movement will continue in the same way, calling it feminism? Or do you think that there's going to be a movement towards saying, like, let's forget these labels and let's actually like recognize the dignity of the persons, the connection we have, and the fact that we have the same body, and that we don't need to have these like ideas that if you're part of the women's movement or the women's march, like you have to follow these ideologies or these philosophies, otherwise you're not a true woman. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I think that the term feminism has always been loaded, and every time it's ever used, it's misunderstood always. I mean, so if I had to just say what would I name this thing off the bat, and let it be its own thing, I think it would be human holism. It's like every human deserves to be whole, like
Yeah.
almost even a natural bodies movement. Um, that our natural bodies are just beautiful and that we shouldn't be altering and changing them so radically, that to be truly whole, to be integrated, to be yourself is that acceptance of the natural body. And so every human, man or woman, really needs to be able to do that in order to find that integrated whole. So I mean, human holism, let's call it that.
Yeah, I think that speaks so well too, especially for those who are Catholic. The body and soul are important. They're equally important, and to understand the goodness of our bodies and the way God made us allows us to speak from a place and live out from a place of dignity. That your dignity matters. You are not lesser than.
Yep.
You are on that same footing, and you have different gifts that you bring, your own geniuses, and that like that is all welcome at the table. And that's very different from what we're seeing right now. I think we see it argued and discussed a lot, but we're often missing the mark in this space right now.
Totally. We're totally just trying to like boil it down. Yeah, the talking points are almost ridiculously um small minded, when we
Mm.
look at the whole of human flourishing and what it takes for humans to actually find peace in our world. We focus in on all the wrong things.
Yeah. I want to touch on this last point here as we're coming to a close. We're in a post-Roe world as of now. And so I think it's very timely that we're actually having this interview now because this is so tied into everything that we're talking about and the work that you're doing. What are you seeing and what are you hoping for women, for men in this post-Roe reality?
You know what I'm really hoping for, honestly, and this is a strategic move that I think needs to happen as kind of a first step to really getting a culture of life kind of like embedded. I'm really hoping to see a very entrepreneurial, enterprising, innovative shift from the pro-life movement, in particular from the pregnancy center movement.
Mm.
I'm really hoping in inviting, I guess, pregnancy centers at this moment in time to think about how we can, in a post-Roe world, better serve women and an expansion of services into full medical, because pregnancy centers have been a very reactive form of meeting women's needs. It's waiting, for a crisis and then meeting women. But now, specifically in the states where abortion is beginning to become very restricted, or maybe it's moving out of state completely,
Mhm.
there's the infrastructure of our pregnancy centers left behind. And can we use this brick and mortar infrastructure, established nonprofits, established boards of directors, donors, everything's already there to do something really proactive for the next generation of young women.
Mm.
And so I think that that's my hope and invitation to the pro-life movement and the pregnancy center movement at this moment in time, to truly lean into healthcare, to lean into a preventative model that does exactly what we've been talking about, Bridget, just reconnecting women with the reality of their bodies, reconnecting with them with the beauty of their fertility, and helping them to see that, a pregnancy is a result of everything going right, of
Yeah.
a completely healthy system. Um, and when that starts to become the norm and the narrative that women are hearing, it changes everything. You no longer just throw a pregnancy away because you realize this is actually miraculous. A lot of women can't achieve this as easily as I just did. It shifts the way we view pregnancy completely. So, in a post-Roe world, I'd like to see our pro-life movement embrace women's bodies in a way that's just kind of radical and feministy, in the sense of women's bodies are amazing.
Mhm.
And yeah, just really build women up.
Yeah. I especially love your point that the possibility of a pregnancy happening means that everything has gone right. How often we
Yeah.
don't hear that. I realized as you said
Yeah.
it, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I don't really hear that." Even within the pro-life world, I think it just has become so saturated, kind of like, "Yeah, yeah, babies are a gift." Like you don't realize that, wait, actually this is a good, like this is actually meaning my body is working well. My body is designed to do this, you
It
know?
takes a healthy body to get pregnant. It takes everything going right. And
Uh,
we just so quickly, oh, well, the circumstances of it are not ideal, or the situation is not ideal. And so we quickly almost just negate that miracle that the woman's body just did. We just quickly gloss over that.
mhm.
And assume that it could do it again at any time. And that's not the reality. I mean, rates of infertility should remind everybody that pregnancy is always miraculous, always.
Yes, so true. We do not hear enough. I think especially from the feminist movement and from the pro-choice or pro-abortion movement around infertility and the conversations around that. We're so quick, and I hear so often the narrative is just like women just get pregnant. You just get pregnant. It's so wild. You just get pregnant. And it's like, I don't know women like that. That was not even my own
Mhm.
story. Like I don't know people who just happen to get pregnant. There are some that I know, but there's just as many who do not. And I think
No,
that is such a lie to be
yeah,
telling women that like, he'll just touch you and you're going to get pregnant. It's like
yeah.
not based on the stats. That's so not
No,
true.
no, no, not at all based on the stats. It's not really how it works. But yet that's kind of the narrative that the other side, the pro-choice movement has really built. They've really kind
Mhm.
of built that narrative that you always have later. Don't ruin your life now. You can always do this later.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And just the dynamics too of gestational pregnancy, and that's at 35 or 36, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
I mean, as you get older, absolutely. I mean, your ability to get pregnant decreases significantly,
right.
after age 35 to 36 years old. Yeah.
And just
It's
that I
much
think
more
that
difficult the longer you
exactly
live.
what you yeah, exactly what you said around preventative care and the pregnancy resource movement and just in the pro-life movement in general, I think is so important. And just like being clear, I think around the stats and what it means and what it looks like to be pregnant at different stages in your life and what's the likelihood and infertility rates, like all of that, I think would really help women better understand their own body and the
Yeah.
decisions that they're making to say,
Yeah.
okay, wow, I didn't realize that it's going to be, how many times harder to get pregnant in my late 30s versus if I'm married in my mid 20s. Okay, maybe we want to rethink this and what this could look like. Those are real conversations that need to be on the table that I think often are not, because you're told you have so much time. And this is
Yeah,
so
and
new
it's
for
just
women to have kids in
assumed.
their 40s. This is so new
Yeah.
still.
Yep, that assumption is not helping a lot of women. That assumption that we can always do it later. Freeze your eggs, do it later. It's like, oh gosh, getting pregnant at 45 feels a lot different than 25. It's a different body. Even just our
Yeah.
cellular breakdown. It's real. It happens. Time is real. Age is real.
Yeah, this has been such a great conversation. There are more questions I want to ask you, but we're coming towards the end of this interview. So I'll just have you on again because I'd love to get into
That'd be great.
more of this around these narratives and around the conversations that are currently at play, because I think it's so important to have this information available to women so that you can really make an informed choice with your life, with your body, with your health, to say, okay, what does this really look like for me? And how do I want to move forward in my life? And maybe I need to make some changes in the way I'm thinking, or I view my body, I view pregnancy and those things. So where can individuals find you? I'll have this in the show notes, but I'd love for you to just, share where they can be following you and finding you.
Well, I'm not honestly very good in social media, but I am on Instagram. It's just Wholistic Feminism is the name of my book, and it's the name of my Instagram. Guiding Star Project. Obviously, I'm the CEO of that. So anytime you contact Guiding Star, it'll eventually get through to me if you're trying to get me. And then my book can be purchased, as well as the new book from Teresa Kenny, The Happy Girl's Guide to Being Whole. They can both be purchased at lumenpress.org.
Awesome. And I'll include those links in the show notes. Leah, thank you so much for being here today and having this conversation with me. Thank you for all of your work and for educating women, and including me here. I'm learning so much in this interview around the goodness of our bodies and the goodness of being a woman. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Bridget. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe, share with your friends, and help expand the conversation around women's health. If you'd like to learn more about fertility awareness, visit www.managingyourfertility.com for more information, resources, guides, and so much more.